Anita Lynch had a life that seemed almost ordinary. A former beauty queen who left the glamour of pageants to care for others, following her mother's path as a nurse. She was a devoted daughter, and despite a recent separation, she and her husband, John, were on the verge of reconciliation. But one fateful night changed everything. What started as a simple walk home became a descent into horror that would leave the entire country in shock. So, what went wrong on that journey? Who were the twisted minds behind the attack, and how did Anita's last steps unravel into one of the most harrowing cases in Australia's history?
Welcome back to Crime Rhapsody. Kindly subscribe to our channel, as it encourages us to research and publish more stories. Thank you.
Anita Lynch was born in Sydney on November 2, 1959, to Gary Bernard Lynch, a graphic artist with the Royal Australian Air Force, and Grace Peggy Lynch, a nurse. As a teenager, Anita participated in beauty pageants, including winning the Miss Western Suburbs pageant in November 1979, and had a promising career as a model. However, she decided instead to follow in her mother's footsteps into nursing. Anita met her future husband while studying for her nursing degree at Sydney Hospital. They married on March 27, 1982. At the time of her murder in 1986, the couple had separated and Anita was living with her parents in Blacktown. According to John, he and Anita were on good terms and, when she was murdered, had been planning to reconcile. Anita worked in Sydney and commuted daily from her home in Blacktown. On the day of the murder, she finished work at Sydney Hospital at 3 p.m. and met friends for dinner in a nearby restaurant. Anita then caught a train from Central Railway Station to Blacktown Station. Arriving at Blacktown, she would usually ring her father, who would pick her up. On this very day, she decided to walk home when the phone was out of order and no taxis were available at the taxi rank, not knowing this very decision would change the course of her life forever. Aside from her killers, only 2 other witnesses saw Anita after she left the train station. Anita was walking alone from the station along Newton Road, Blacktown around 10 p.m., when a gang of 5 men drove up beside her and stopped their stolen white HT Holden Kingswood. 2 men leapt from the car and dragged her into the vehicle as she kicked and screamed. From a house nearby, a teenage boy, his younger sister, and their mother heard someone screaming from the street in front of their house and had gone outside in time to see Anita being forced into the car. The boy ran across the road to help, but the car drove off before he reached. Returning home, he telephoned the police to report what he had seen. A few minutes later, their neighbor and his girlfriend arrived home and, after being told of the abduction, drove off to search for the car. They eventually drove down Reen Road, now known as Peter Brock Drive, in Prospect, and stopped by the now empty Holden, where the man used a spotlight to search the adjacent paddock. Seeing nothing in the paddock and believing the car he was looking for was a different model Holden, he returned home. The attackers later stated that they had hidden in the long grass to avoid the spotlight and waited for the man to leave. Once inside the car on Newton Road, Anita was ordered to strip off her clothes but refused, begging the boys to let her go and saying she was married and also menstruating at that period. The boys began punching Anita repeatedly, breaking her nose and both cheekbones, before forcing her to perform oral sex on all 5 of them. The attackers then drove to a service station to purchase petrol using money stolen from Anita's purse. Anita was then driven down Reen Road to the secluded paddock, while being held down in the car, sexually violated repeatedly, and being continually beaten by her 5 attackers. They then dragged the brutally beaten Anita into the paddock along a barbed wire fence, where they dumped her and continued to sexually and physically abuse her for some time. According to his taped confession, one of the attackers, John Travers, then became concerned that Anita could identify them because she had seen their faces and heard their names, and convinced the other attackers to kill her. Urged on by the others, Travers slit her throat and almost severed her head. When Anita did not return home, her family initially thought she was staying overnight with a friend, but after learning that she failed to appear at work the next day, they reported her missing on February 3rd. On the morning of February 4th, her naked body was found in the paddock by a farmer investigating what his cows were milling around.
Anita's brutalised body was found in a farmer's field off Reen Road at Prospect.
I just couldn't believe it was a human there laying in the paddock. I thought it was $1 or something at first.
It struck me that it was unusual in the sense that it was very much a rural location, almost in the heart of Western Sydney, in Blacktown.
She'd been repeatedly raped, her throat cut.
We could see these really terrible lacerations to her throat, and then when we rolled her over and her eyes were open, the look of horror was still there on her face.
Her eyes were open, and the agony in her eyes. That's something that's always stuck more in my mind than anything.
Anita's body was initially identified by her distinctive wedding ring, which was still on her finger when she was found. Her estranged husband John was initially suspected of her murder, but was quickly cleared. The Australian public reacted with anger upon hearing details of Anita's murder. On February 6th, the New South Wales state government posted a $50,000 Australian reward for information leading to the capture of Anita's killers. Also on February 6th, morning radio host John Laws obtained a leaked copy of Anita's autopsy report, which contained explicit details of her injuries, and read it live on the air, both shocking and galvanizing public sentiment. In a 2016 interview with 7 News, Laws said he did it because he felt the general public ought to know and that it incited anger in the public that murders like this were happening and we weren't being given the full details. On February 9th, police reenacted Anita's movements on the night of her disappearance in the hope of jogging the memories of travelers or others who might have seen her. Constable Debbie Wallace wore similar clothing to Anita and traveled the 9:12 p.m. train to Blacktown. Detectives interviewed the passengers and showed them photos of Anita while Wallace walked the length of the train during the journey. Following a tip-off from a police informant regarding the stolen Holden, police started searching for Travers, Michael Murdoch, and his brothers Les, Michael and Gary Murphy after they discovered that some of them had a history of violence, and that Travers had a reputation for carrying a knife. On February 21st, police arrested Travers and Murdoch at the home of Travers' uncle and Les Murphy at Travers' own house. Murdoch and Murphy were charged with offenses relating to stolen cars and released on police bail. Travers, who admitted that he had stolen a car, made conflicting statements about the murder and was detained in police custody. While in custody, he requested that a friend be called so she could bring him cigarettes. The phone number was handed to the investigating police who contacted the friend, a woman. The woman, Travers' girlfriend, eventually dubbed Miss X, agreed to help with the investigation, met with an officer, and gave him details of Travers' background. Miss X was subsequently sent back in to talk to Travers, agreeing to hide a recording microphone device in her bra while she visited him in his cell and was able to obtain a confession. Miss X later went to Murdoch's home while wearing the concealed recording device to capture his statements on tape as well.
With her? Did you have sex with her? Did anybody else? All of them? Sometimes, why did you have to stop up? Why did you have to do that? Come here, come close. We're all drunk. She fucking said all of us. Well, she saw your faces. And you knew. So what the other said you had to do it. Who said it had to be done? You. You all agreed. But that's not your thing, John. You haven't done that before, have you? Truthfully. Don't laugh. It's not funny.
Eventually, 5 men were arrested and charged with the murder. Police were praised for their quick response in capturing all suspects involved. In total, 22 days had elapsed from the time of the murder to the time all suspects were taken into custody. John Raymond Travers, aged 18 in 1986, was considered the ringleader of the gang. He was raised in relative poverty in Blacktown, the oldest of 8 children from unmarried teenage parents. By age 14, he was already an alcoholic and was expelled from high school for being continually disruptive to other students. Beyond schooling, Travers held few jobs and relied mostly on unemployment benefits as a source of income. He was eventually committed to Boys Town, a juvenile detention facility, by his mother. His father, with whom he never shared a close relationship, left the household in 1981. Finding it difficult to support the family, Travers relied on crime to provide food, such as stealing animals for the family's dinners, including chickens and ducks from nearby households. The health of Travers' mother eventually deteriorated, and he and his siblings were sent to live with foster families while she was placed in a hospice. Travers had a history of violent sexual behavior against males and females, as well as bestiality. During the times when he resorted to stealing poultry for his family's meals, he is alleged to have sexually abused the birds prior to butchering and cooking them. Michael Murdoch, who was 18 in 1986, was a childhood friend and criminal associate of Travers. He had also spent a great part of his childhood in juvenile prisons, where he experienced sexual assaults. He was known to have written to politicians during this period of imprisonment seeking protection from such assaults. The Murphy brothers, which included Michael, Gary, and Les Murphy, were three brothers from a family of 9 children. At the time of the murder, Michael Murphy, aged 33, was the eldest, followed by Gary Murphy, 28, and Les Murphy, aged 22. They all had troubled childhood and had uncountable run-ins with the law, ranging from car theft and different kinds of misdemeanors leading to the murder. The longer they stayed in custody, the more outraged by the people, with many calling for them to be hanged, including nursing associates of Anita who held solidarity marches repeatedly, all in an effort to bring more attention to the case and for the suspects to receive the worst sentence imaginable. It was as a result of all these that the trials began in Sydney on March 16, 1987. According to the medical examiner's report, Cobby's body showed extensive bruising on her head, breasts, face, shoulders, groin, thighs, and legs consistent with the systematic beating, including a blow of considerable force around the right eye. She also had lacerations on her hips, thighs, and legs from the barbed wire, several cuts to her neck resulting in the severing of her ear and windpipe and near decapitation, and many cuts to her hands and fingers, resulting in the near severing of 3 of her fingers, which likely occurred when she raised her hands to her face trying to protect herself from the knife. The medical examiner later testified that after Cobby's throat was cut, she would have died within 2 minutes. She was not mutilated apart from the slashing of her throat and hands. There had been no attack with a knife on her stomach or genitals, and her shoulders had not been dislocated. The trial for the remaining members of the gang lasted 54 days. Gary Murphy, who had famously wet his pants when police arrested him, along with his 2 brothers and Michael Murdoch, all tried to point the finger of blame at Travers. The trial for the gang lasted 54 days, with the men's defense relying on convincing the jury of their minimal involvement in the beating and murder. On June 10, 1987, all 5 were found guilty of sexual assault and murder. On June 16, they were each sentenced in the Supreme Court of New South Wales to life imprisonment plus additional time without the possibility of parole. Justice Alan Maxwell described the crime as one of the most horrifying physical and sexual assaults. This was a calculated killing done in cold blood. The executive should grant the same degree of mercy they bestowed on their victim. Anita Cobby's parents would join forces with Christine and Peter Simpson, the parents of child murder victim Ebony Simpson, who had been snatched and murdered by a man whilst making her way home from school in 1992. They created the Homicide Victim Support Group to help families deal with the aftermath of heinous crimes. The Lynches also campaigned in seeking tougher sentencing and truth in sentencing laws, which eventuated after Anita's murder. In 1996, John Travers and another inmate were being transported from Goulburn Correctional Center to Long Bay Hospital when they attempted to escape from the prison van by hacksawing through and kicking in the back door. When the attempt was noticed, the van pulled over at Bowral Police Station, and the 2 were arrested and charged. Travers was regularly kept in protection at the Goulburn because he was often involved in bloody fights with other inmates. As of 2022, John Travers is housed in Wellington Correctional Center in maximum security. To this day, Michael Murdoch also remains imprisoned in Goulburn's maximum security prison. As for the Murphy brothers, Les Murphy is housed in Goulburn Correctional Center in maximum security, along with his brother Gary Murphy. On the morning of June 25, 2019, Gary was severely beaten by several other prisoners in a shower block and transferred to hospital in a critical condition. Michael Murphy was housed in Long Bay Correctional Complex in maximum security. A few years later, Michael Murphy was transferred to Goulburn Correctional Center, where he spent most of his imprisonment, and he usually kept to himself and stayed out of trouble. In September 2018, Murphy was transferred from Goulburn to Long Bay due to deteriorating health. It was reported that he had terminal cancer and was living in end-of-life care. He died on February 21, 2019 at the age of 66.
32 years after he was sentenced to spend the rest of his life behind bars without the possibility of parole, Michael Murphy has died in jail. One of 5 men convicted over the brutal rape and murder of Anita Cobby, Murphy had been suffering from liver cancer, most recently in palliative care at Long Bay Jail. Overnight, corrective services confirmed the 66-year-old had died in prison.
Cobby's father Gary Lynch died on September 14, 2008, aged 90, suffering from Alzheimer's disease. Her mother, Grace, died of lung cancer in 2013 at the age of 88. The Lynches had been married for 54 years at the time of Gary's death.